Hi, today I want to talk to you about sentence fragments and run-ons. These are probably the two most common errors that I encounter as a writing teacher. And in order to identify if you are committing either of these two crimes of writing, you need to understand the basic structure of a sentence. Now, all you really need to have a sentence is a subject and a verb, which means you can have two words that are a sentence. The dog walked, she ate, he sneezed, we talked. Very short sentences, but these are sentences and they are complete. Then you have compound sentences. Compound sentence basically is two simple sentences joined by a comma and a conjunction. Now, to refresh your memory, conjunctions are you can think of the acronym fanboys. So you have for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. These are your basic conjunctions that join sentences or join parts of sentences. So, for example, the dog walked, comma, but the cat slept. Compound sentence. Now, these are not Nobel Prize winning sentences here, okay? Just illustrating a point. You also then have your complex sentence. This is where you add a subordinating conjunction. And subordinating conjunctions are words like although, while, once, since, however can be a subordinating conjunction. And we will talk more about these later on in the course, but they are words that are another way to join two independent clauses or two simple sentences. So if you look at the example, the dog walked while the cat slept. Basically, the subordinating conjunction is replacing the comma but. This is a complex sentence, and it is a little different than just a compound sentence. And then you can have a very complicated sentence, the compound complex, which contains a subject, a verb, and another subject and verb, and those two independent clauses or sentences are joined by a comma and a conjunction. But then one of the two of those sentences is also going to contain a subordinating clause, which is a subordinate conjunction plus a subject and a verb. So you have your simple sentence, the dog walked, and you have your simple sentence, the cat slept. But we're adding on this dependent clause, while Sally practiced the piano. That while Sally practiced the piano has to be attached to something because it contains a subordinating conjunction, while. So it's attached as part of the sentence, the cat slept while Sally practiced the piano. And then that is joined to the first part, the first sentence with the common conjunction and. So these are your basic sentence structures. A fragment happens when you're missing a part of your sentence. Either there is no person, place, or thing, there's no subject, or there is no action or no verb. A sentence does not necessarily have to have an action. You can have sentences where you just have a linking verb. She is pretty. There is no action happening in that sentence, but you do have a verb is. It's a linking verb because it links she to pretty. It's linking she to a description of what she is. So your linking verbs, if you want to make a note of it, are am, is, are, was, were. These link a subject to a description of the subject. They can exist and make a complete sentence as long as there's a description, something that they are linking to. You don't want to have a philosophical statement like I am, okay? Like I exist. No, you want to have it joined to something. I am a teacher. So make sure that you are always have some kind of subject, person, place, or thing, and something is happening. What about this person, place, or thing, or what is happening in regards to that? And you should be able to identify that in every sentence you write. Fragments happen most commonly if you have one of these 5 things. The first being a prepositional phrase. Sometimes people have a prepositional phrase, like this example, around the time I was planning to leave. In this case, people think it may be a sentence because I was planning to leave is a complete sentence. But when your subject and verb, when your noun and verb are part of a prepositional phrase, meaning there's a preposition in front of it, and if you're not sure what prepositions are, Google them. There's a gazillion of them, but prepositions are kind of placement words telling when or where something happens: on, in, above, beyond, to, from, for. These are all prepositions. There are lots of them, so Google it. You can get yourself a list to save to look at. But if a subject and verb come after a preposition and they are part of that phrase, this is not part of your sentence. This is additional information and it cannot be a complete sentence. So that would be a fragment. So be careful for that. Watch out for that. Then when you have dependent or subordinate clauses, these are the same thing, but they go by two different names. These begin with a subordinating conjunction. Again, if you want to clarify these, Google subordinating conjunctions, you can get a list of those as well. These may include a noun and verb, but also they are not the subject or verb of a sentence. So, for example, when we left for the airport. When is a subordinating conjunction. However, people see we left for the airport and they believe they have a complete sentence. What's your subject? We. What's the verb? Left. No. Because these follow a dependent word or a subordinate word, they cannot make a complete sentence. And when you read this, you should see that something is missing. Some piece of information is missing. I'm not knowing what happens when you left for the airport. So that's what you want to look for. Gerunds are another warning sign. You want to watch out for these. Gerunds are ing verbs that can act as a subject, such as dancing is my hobby. In this case, dancing is a noun. It's a thing. It is my hobby, what I enjoy doing. But you always want to be careful of how an ing verb is used. If you have an ing verb phrase, it has to include another verb somewhere in order to be a complete thought. So, walking through the pouring rain, walking is not being used necessarily as a gerund in this case. You have your ing, but you, again, are not telling me what is happening as you're walking through the pouring rain. There's no subject or verb actually taking place in this sentence. Infinitives are two verbs. This is not one that I see very commonly, but it does occasionally occur. So you want to make sure that you're not using a to verb. It will never be a complete thought. To reach the entrance, not a complete thought. And examples, when people use example words, particularly for example, you want to make sure that if you're using that as a sentence itself, it is a complete sentence. You're not just listing things after it. So, for example, the example here reads, for example, heavy rain, sleet, and increasingly strong winds. Well, I'm listing things, I'm giving an example of something, but it's not a complete sentence. It still needs to be a sentence, or it needs to be affixed to a previous sentence where you're telling me whatever it is that you're giving an example of. So watch for that. So let's look at how you could correct these 5 different things. All right, so in red here on this slide, you see the error. When you find that you have a fragment in your writing, just ask yourself logically what is missing. What piece of information are you not telling your reader? Every sentence in your writing, if you extract it by itself, should make sense. It shouldn't need the context of the previous sentence or the preceding sentence. You should have all the information you need to understand that sentence in that sentence. And when you are revising and editing your essays, I want you to look at them on a sentence by sentence level to make sure that you are formulating a complete, clear thought each time. So if you look at this first one, you have your prepositional phrase fragment, around the time I was planning to leave. What happened? Well, around the time I was planning to leave, a hurricane was forecast to reach the mainland. The second one, when we left for the airport, here's your subordinate dependent clause. What happened? When we left for the airport, the rain had just begun. A note about subordinate clauses. When you have something like this with a subordinating conjunction, and again, we will go into this more later on in the course. When we left for the airport, this phrase could actually come at the beginning of your main clause, your sentence, or at the end. When you have a subordinating clause at the beginning, you want to use a comma after it. But if you were to put it at the end of your sentence, and either way it's completely okay, you don't need a comma before it. So I could have written, the rain had just begun when we left for the airport. All is one sentence with no commas, and that would be acceptable as well. Walking through the pouring rain, comma, I began to wonder if we'd get out on time. You cannot do the same rearranging with this particular case, because this walking through the pouring rain is going to be describing whatever noun it is directly next to. So if you put it at the end of the sentence, time is walking through the pouring rain, and that doesn't make any sense. So we want to watch out when you're using gerund phrases that they are next to whatever they are talking about, whatever's doing that action, walking through the pouring rain. It seemed to take forever just to reach the entrance. I'm just adding that affinitive phrase at the end of a sentence. And then I'm giving my, for example, sentence, I'm adding a there was in it. Then the severe weather started. For example, there was heavy rain, sleet, and increasingly strong wind. So look for these in your writing and make sure that you fix them appropriately and creatively, so you add variety to your writing as you are making corrections. Now let's talk about run-ons. A run-on sentence occurs when you have two or more independent clauses or complete sentences that are bound by only one period. Here's an example. At the airport, I began to get nervous. I was already not fond of flying, and the weather situation put me on edge. This has components that could make it not a run-on sentence pretty easily, but it's a run-on sentence because each color, the red, the blue, and the green, are individual sentences. They are independent clauses, and they can stand alone as a sentence by themselves. So it needs to be fixed. How do you do that? You can add a comma and conjunction between two independent clauses. You could use a semicolon to separate the two independent clauses. Now, semicolons function like a period. So you don't want to use a semicolon where you would only use a comma. And you want to use a semicolon when your two ideas are very closely related. So if you're moving from one idea to a new topic or a new idea, a semicolon is not appropriate. But when you have one sentence that is a follow-up of the idea in the previous sentence, you could use a semicolon there. And I encourage you to try using semicolons, but do not overuse them. Another thing you can do to fix a run-on is to put a period at the end of the first clause and begin a new sentence. And, of course, capitalize the first word of the sentence. And then finally, you can use a subordinating conjunction. Again, these subordinating conjunctions are my favorite words to use in writing because they give you so much opportunity to add variety to your sentence structure. And we will definitely touch on these later. So you can use this to join ideas and also show a relationship between them if you use these subordinating conjunctions. So let's look at this. One example of how to correct this. At the airport, I began to get nervous and I was already not fond of writing, blah, 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 blah. You need to use two techniques. You could add a period and then add a comma and conjunction. So, at the airport, I began to get nervous, period. I was already not fond of flying, comma, and the weather situation put me on edge. That's the easiest, most straightforward, most obvious way to correct this sentence, but not necessarily the most creative or best way, especially if you're looking to add some variety to your sentence structure. You can add a semicolon. At the airport, I began to get nervous, semicolon. I was already not fond of flying, period. The weather situation put me on edge. Or you can try experimenting with using a subordinating conjunction. So, at the airport, I began to get nervous, period. Because I was already not fond of flying, comma, the weather situation put me on edge. There, I've changed it from instead of 3 sentences to 2.